So good morning. So this is part 3 of the tour around Grassington. It's the last leg of it, probably the shortest part of it almost. And you can see on the map here, I'm coming from the Grassington town centre, coming down, having to cross Grassington Bridge and coming along the road here past Threshfield Primary School. It's worth noting where that is, because the other part of Freshfield that I've looked at before is up here. I'm including a bit of this. This is Station Road that goes across the end of the bridge and joins the main road between from Skipton that goes right up to the top of the dale there. So I'm just there's two things I'm looking at here. This is what it says here, Freshfield Court Care Home, and the St Margaret Clitheroe Church. And you also notice that the secondary school, the high school for the Upper Wharfedale, is on the upper side of the road there. So that's where the children go to school after that. But the primary school is way down here, which near enough stands on its own on this minor road that leads from the end of the bridge to St Michael and All Angels Church, the parish church for the whole area. It's about 1.5 miles from there, but because the denizens of Grassington, of the parishioners, would probably have come down and come across here, where there's probably always been a bridge across the falls. So that's probably one of the shortcuts that they would have had to have made. So let's look at the first part of this. This is the Grassington Bridge where I came down here. And so this sort of connects Linton with Grassington. It's was first built in 1603 in stone, so it's probably been a wooden bridge before that. But rather, what we largely see today is of 1825, although it has been sort of levelled off and raised ever since there. So it's quite a formidable bridge, that is. So we're going to come across here and then turn left at the end. That's the road that goes down to Linton Falls. But before that, we're going to come up here, which is Station Road, which leads up to the main road from Skipton. And this is where the railway came in 1902. I think they call it the Yorkshire Dales Railway. And the station here at Freshfield, actually called Grassington Station. And so this is really all that's left of it. This was the care home today, but was called the Wilson Arms Hotel. It was called the Wilson Arms because around 1900, the estate, in 1880, 1890, the estate was brought by Matthew Wilson. He was an MP. He was the first MP for Skipton, and he was 83 at the time. He only served 1 year as an MP for Skipton, although he'd been involved in sort of on a regional scale on sort of Yorkshire committees and things like that. But he sort of brought himself into sort of a bit of, probably not himself into disrepute, but they put a statue of him at the top of the high street in Skipton. It stood where the cenotaph is today, but that was moved into the front of the library where it still stands today, just a bit further down from that. What people didn't like about it was that it was actually put up during his own lifetime, where it's considered that you put a statue up after you've passed on. And so that he was it was moved after his death, but that's how it came to be called the Wilson Arms Hotel. And this was really the hotel for the railway station. The railway finished just behind here, but there's nothing to see because they've sort of built over parts of it. But I showed you at the other part of Freshfield where the road from Burnsall comes into Freshfield, and where there's the you go underneath the railway bridge there, so there's a public right of way up onto the track there, and you can see as it sort of went into Freshfield, but there's no sign of a station there anymore. You can see it closed for passengers in 1930 and then closed for transportation of goods in 1969, and then the track was completely lifted, but only as far as just beyond Linton, where I said right at the beginning, Swindon Quarry there, which is still quarries limestone in the Dale, loads it onto the trains there, but goes down to Skipton and then goes circuitously around it and then down to Sturton to be made into concrete or aggregate for road building. So just up from that, on the same side of the road, if you're going up the hill, it's the left-hand side, and because it's probably one of the most modern buildings in this area, the Church of St Margaret Clitheroe, the Roman Catholic Church here. And you say this is fairly modern, built in 1973, because a much unusual design. but it's one of the few which is dedicated to St Margaret Clitheroe. She was was a lady that was born on the Shambles and lived on the Shambles in York, and she was crushed to death for harbouring priests in 1556. And I showed you a bit of a week, her hand that had been severed off her body is now in the Bar Convent Museum there. So this is sort of, she was canonised in 1970, which probably accounts for this church being built, being dedicated to her. So let's go back down onto the road at the end of a bridge that connects through to Linton Falls and the parish church down there. And this is Freshfield Primary School. This is still in use to date. It was built in 1674 by the Reverend Matthew Hewitt. We'll see the Reverend Matthew Hewitt a bit later on, because he had his rectory up in the village of Linton itself, and he had this funded to become the free school around here, and later became a grammar school, and then until 1865 it just continued really as a primary school, as it does today. Probably one of the oldest sort of primary schools, I'm not saying in this area, because the primary school down at Burnsall is just as old as this school here as well, so but still kept it in use today. So coming on that minor road, it brings us out onto Linton Falls, and where Linton Mill used to stand. So this is a better photograph than I've seen before of it, to show the extent of it. It was first built in 1788 as a worsted mill, but because unusually that didn't last long, but rather like a lot of this area, it was turned into a cotton mill. And there are lots of cotton mills around here. There's one at Ayrton, just south of Malham, and in other areas, so bordering onto Lancashire, that could be connected to the cotton trade in Liverpool by the opening of the Leeds-Liverpool Canal. So that's how it was brought up here, and how I mentioned earlier that the Liverpool warehouse, which is now the Stripey Badger bookshop in Grassington, was so named because of the goods that was coming, the cotton goods that were coming up to Linton Mill. And so it was a cotton mill. It's actually lasted quite a long time, until 1983. It was owned by the Beck family, who also had interests out in Settle as well, in the wider family of that. And I say some of these buildings still stand today, or the base of these here, as you'll see by the falls itself, the bottom part of this mill, which creates a formidable structure, I guess, to hold back any floodwaters and things like that. The mill manager's house is still there, because that's no longer there, but the cottages are still there as well, because these were converted into modern housing in 1986. So that's the mill down there, because one of the longer lasting mills in this part of Yorkshire. So coming down there, I've got all this on a piece of film as well, because you can take a short route off the road that goes down to the parish church down there, and there is a pay and display car park a bit further down that's run by the Yorkshire Dales National Park. I think it's free for 10 minutes, which means you can't really do much in that time, apart from probably run to the falls and run back again. But it won't give you enough time to walk down the road to the parish church. Otherwise, they sort of got you for £2.70 for up to 2 hours, and £4.70 for over 2 hours. But I guess the 10 minutes sort of a short stay they have is to allow you to probably use the toilets facilities down there. But we'll see that on the side of the road just a bit further down. So there's a right-of-way footpath that brings you down off the corner. You'll see this on the film as well, because the path splits from where I've taken this photograph. To the right, it goes down to the falls. But if you go over this bridge called the Little Emily's Bridge, it's thought to date, the bridge itself, from the 14th century, and said to have been named after Emily Norton, the daughter of Christopher Norton. He took part in the Rising of the North in 1536. Further down the valley, from Freshfield going down to Skipton and beyond Cracoe, there's a up on the fell side there's Norton Tower, which sort of faces down onto valley. If you know where to look, you can see the remains of the Norton Tower. So they're a big family around here, Roman Catholic one, and that's why they think that it comes to be known as Little Emily's Bridge. So I'm going to cross over this small humpback bridge, which goes over a stream called Captain Beck that goes underneath that and joins the River Wharfe, which is just over here in the distance. So I'm going to cross over there because it's quite interesting to come across here, because there's really two things to have a look at. The hydro over there, but this was Freshfield Mill, not a sort of a mill like the cotton mill there, but this was a site of a corn mill around here, and that's probably accounts for the weir just slightly up here coming off that to feed that corn mill to make the machinery turn. And now it's largely sort of free cottage, so it was a very rudimentary corn mill there, and these date from the 17th century. And one of the more longer lasting ones into the 1920s was a dairy and creamery as well. So it sort of follows that tradition of sort of Dale's Dairy, which I showed you up in Grassington at the end of Chapel Street itself. So if you come along this track here, because it's a public right of way and a footpath as well, it brings you to Linton Hydro. It's quite unusual because it's quite an old hydro built in 1909 for the Grassington Electric Supply Company. And it was to supply, obviously, the town of Grassington with electricity on the other side, just up there. But unfortunately, it was bought by by Linton Mill in 1918, and to supply the cotton mill there with power. And the problem was that if they wanted a lot of more electricity to supply the cotton mill, the lights went out in Grassington. And because they also gave the mill the right to sort of charge what they liked for the electricity as well. So a lot of people were against that as well. The brick generating house here was built in 1920, but the scheme, the use of this hydro came to an end in 1948. But since then, sort of hydroelectricity has become a big thing on these rivers. There's one by the bridge between Settle and Grassington, and others around the place as well. So it was recommissioned in 2012, and to say these Archimedes screws, which are hidden in here, they do actually make quite a lot of noise when you're there on the site. You'll hear a little bit at the end of the film, and because they can now power 90 houses, or generates enough electricity to power 90 houses. So let's have a look at our first bit of film. So this is a shortest piece which looks over this area coming as far as the hydro itself. Because there's no talking on this, it's just some music. So further down, you can see where the hydro is up there. This is Linton Mill. So that's the weir at the top there feeding the hydro. And this is the further weir further down here that fed into the Linton Mill. And you'll see that on the bit of film a bit later off, because the water off here, it comes into a leat, which then feeds into the mill itself. And then further down, we've got the Linton Falls. Like I say, you can still see the mill leat weir just across there. So they're sort of next to one another. And this is part of the Craven fault. It's around about 33 miles long. It's the one that includes sort of Craven, Malham Cove. It continues a bit further over to Skyram, where there's Troller's Gill, and really that's the sort of the last of it, because then it's sort of if you've been in this area, that it's sort of the sort of valley comes to a head, and then it crosses over into sort of Nidderdale, over into that area. So this is really the Troller's Gill is really the last place that you can see it. But this is most easily accessible of the lot, because you can walk across here looking straight down onto the fault. I say it drops about 33 feet around here as well. The bridge, you can see, you'll see it on the film as well. The bridge here was erected so that workers, the textile workers from the Grassington side could come to the mill on this side. So that's really the whole reason behind it. But this is a much newer bridge than that one. The mill workers came down, sorry. I seem to have missed the photograph out here of the came down the Snake Walk, and that leads off the Yorkshire Dales car park on the Hebden Road coming out of Grassington, and comes down here. I think there might be a bit on the film itself, and it's a walled track that comes all the way down and it's flagged, so it comes so they won't get their feet dirty, and so it'd been very noisy probably with their clogs coming down here. So obviously I've got a bit of film coming up here, so let's have a look at this of it coming over Linton Falls. But coming around, we could see the back of on the bit of film as well. The footpath is a bit further around the corner. I'm stood here by the car park, and these are called Botany Cottages, probably for a fairly fairly simple reason, because some of the wool and other materials that came up to here for use in some of the other materials, because cotton was sometimes combined with wool to create all different types of fabric, and that's why it's named after Botany Bay, these cottages. But if you look closely on the other piece of film, it's actually there's a double row of cottages that we really can't see from coming down the road down here, and so the other terrace is identical to this one but stands parallel behind, and it's the other one that looks out onto the river, and obviously this one out onto the road. And then coming down here, so from that car park, it's a good 10-minute walk from that car park down to St Michael and All Angels, because you'll see that on the film as well. And so there's a bit of film on St Michael All Angels, so I won't really go into it. But this is what you got here. You got the parish cross. These are probably the older steps to get in, probably to stop sheep from getting into the graveyard to begin with. So let's have a look at this piece of film that includes a bit of history of the church itself.
This is Linton Church, which is another slight misnomer, as the village of Linton lies over half a mile further up the valley side. But it was built centrally for the villages of Grassington, Threshfield, Linton and Hebden. It's a beautiful church and dates from around 1150, although most of what you can see is 14th century. You can't help but notice the unusual square bell turret. It's well worth looking inside. The supporting columns vary from Norman to Tudor times. The original Norman church probably would have only taken up the width of the nave and less than half the length of the present church. The other early relic is the Norman font by the entrance. Above you in the chancel, look at the 14th or 15th century roof bosses. Some depict the Green Man, a fertility symbol commonly used throughout Yorkshire. Look for this brass behind the altar in the South Chapel to Thomas Hammond, who died on the 24th of March 1685 and was only buried on the 27th of March 1686. This was due to the new year starting on March the 25th, prior to 1752. One of the most popular walks in the Dale is to walk beside the river from here to Burnsall. First you have to cross the stepping stones, if you can. This was once the only way people from Hebden could get to Linton Church.
because that was the problem. I don't think you really cross those stepping stones anymore. I went to have a look, not in September, but the year before, and they're fully covered over there as well. So people normally walk down the other side where there's a permissive path, and that takes you past Low Mill. This is the mill, the other side of the river, that you can see, not on that piece of film, but it just stands beyond the graveyard there. So it's easily seen, because if there's still the right of way across those stepping stones, but normally they are completely covered up there as well. And so this was built in the late 18th century as a corn mill. You can see the water coming down here. There used to be a great water wheel on the side there to turn that. Then it became redundant in the 1930s and became a house in 1974. And on the other side of this thing, where the stream coming down here, which there's nothing to see, but it dates back to when I was talking about the Cliffords of Skipton, when they bought the manor of Grassington, and they bought these lead miners up. And this is the area to the left of this photograph, which is just off it. It's covered in trees and there's nothing to see. This is where they first came to dig for lead ore, the galena around here, 1603, 1605 period. And they had a little smelt house there, because there was nothing there at all now to be seen. But like I say, they always required a source of water, and that's what was coming down there. And I mentioned last week is that the lead mines at Yarnbury started off in 1637. So let's have a look at the last part of our route, going from the church up to the village of Linton itself. It's about 1.5 miles or so from the church up to here, but it was connected more directly with what they call a corpse road, because a track that went across here, across the fields down to the church, but it still would have been a mile walk for them at least down there. The word Linton means village by the tarn. And so this was sort of a bit of a waterlogged area around here. And as I mentioned later on, is that it was quite a flax centre around here as well, largely because they could grow the flax plants in this area where it was boggy, where the tarn was. But like I say, over the centuries, it eventually dried up around there as well. Because it was in 1812, around about that period. But like I say, it didn't last long, because by 1850, the linen industry there was all over. So it was only a very short-lived one as well. I guess the flax plants dried out the land, and then it became agricultural land there as well. And because the village here is all grouped around the central green, and it was all really under the ownership of the Dukes of Devonshire since 1750, the same time they inherited the Grassington lands as well. As we come up here, so this is the junction there, which I said there's a car parking spaces for around about 10 cars at the side of the road there. And I parked twice that day when I filmed around this area down here, and there was always car parking spaces down there, and because it's slightly nearer than actually going from the car park itself. So if you're going to turn up there for half an hour to have a look, like I say, I'd recommend just parking there at that very small junction where there's a bridge over Captain Beck. So if we're coming up here and we're crossing the main road that goes between Bolton Abbey, Burnsall, and then joins a road here at Freshfield, just above the bridge here, just below where the railway station was. So we're crossing that and then taking this minor road across to Linton. There's a building here, which I've forgotten to take a photograph of, but you'll see on the film and probably say, what's that? And it's called the Arthur Anderton Memorial Institute. It looks like it could have been a primary school or something like that, but this was a memorial institute and men's reading room, as it says on the plaque on the front. It opened in 1907, because I immediately thought, but it's probably someone who was killed during World War I. But he died aged 56 at the Prince of Wales Hotel in Southport, quite a smart hotel there, in 1904. But he lived at Linton House, which is really a Victorian house in the village, which I'll show you. And he was an alderman and other things. He wasn't born in Linton, he's actually born in Cleckheaton. So oddly, born in Cleckheaton, died in Southport, but was living in Linton. And I think he lived in Linton for about 20 odd years as well. And so the money was given by his widow, Mary, for the building of the institute. It's now the village hall. And I said it doesn't really have an association with World War I. In fact, it does. It has a stone memorial behind the institute to those men who died in World War I. On the plaques there, it says that there were 33 men from Linton who died, but that might mean a slightly wider area, because we'll see inside Fountain's Hospital, inside at Linton Village itself, I think it only lists 17 men on there as well. So I don't know why there's the discrepancy between there. And because Mary Anderton, she lived in the hall until she died. She was aged 96 in 1947. So that's what stands at the side of a road just before we go into Linton. I guess she might have owned the land. That's why it probably just stands slightly outside the village itself. It's probably a sort of a minute and a half walk from the village, but there isn't a car park or anything. So you have to, if you presume people going to an event there, have to park in the village and then walk up to that. So there's various villages in Linton. This is Linton Beck that flows through it, then drops down into the River Wharfe. This is the last of the bridges, or the most modern bridge. There's the date plaque there, 1892 onto it. Largely because we'll see on the film and photographs, there's another bridge that stands higher up, which is like a pack horse bridge standing next to a ford. There's a clapper bridge higher up than that. Where I've taken this photograph from is from some stepping stones as well. So there's various sort of bridging of the beck that runs through here. So that's a Linton Bridge. I'm going to come in here, which is if you're coming up from the road, from the Burnsville Freshfield Road, is what you'll see first, this left-hand turn, which comes up to a dead end. This is the only road across between the two parts of the village, but the main part of the village, you've got to cross on one of these bridges higher up. This road comes out to a junction by Swindon Quarry. So if you're coming up from Skipton, it's just before you reach Freshfield. It's on your left-hand side. It's a massive thing because it's got the railway there as well. There tend to be sort of trains and wagons full of the limestone up there. So that's where that road comes out. So it's about another mile and a half further on across to that junction. So you can actually come into Linton from that side as well, but you have to be prepared to signal as you sort of come across the quarry to cross there. Otherwise, you've got to come all the way round again. So I'm coming up there where those cottages are over there, because a lot of these things have been converted, as we'll see today, is that those cottages there were converted out of a barn in 1970, and higher up we'll see this one here, a former barn, has just been converted this year, and the photograph I'm showing you later on is a barn which is in collapse, and you'll see on the film that is being converted at the moment into a property. So there's got to be a bit of an influx of people into here. So coming up that road, what we're coming over here is the pack horse, sorry, on the left-hand side, just on that photograph taking, is the rectory. And this is where I mentioned about Matthew Hewitt being the rector up here as well. And it's rather unusual because there were two rectories, or as they call them, mediaties. And so there are two rectories side by side in here until 1866. And that's when the sort of I guess the parishes were split. And later on, this rectory then became a youth hostel, and now has returned back into into houses. So I guess there's probably a few houses in there. So that was a former rectory where Matthew Hewitt lived in one part of those. He's the chap that built the Threshfield Primary School lower down. And then this odd one, which is easy to miss, which sort of faces you at the end of that pack horse bridge, called the Holiday Fellowship plaque. It's rather unusual because you might be able to read it on the photograph, but it says, "A request from the Holiday Fellowship. Friend, when you stay or sit and take your ease on moor, fell or under spreading trees, pray leave no traces of your wayside meal, no paper bag, no scattered orange peel, nor daily journal littered on the grass. Others may view these with distaste and pass. Let no one say, and say it to your shame, that all was beauty here until you came. So that says at the bottom, these words printed on a card can be obtained from the Holiday Fellowship Limited, Fellowship House, Great North Way, Hendon, Northwest 4. I don't know if they're still located there, or someone would probably get quite a surprise if they did get letters asking for that. But the Holiday Fellowship company still exists. It's called HF Holidays today, and they organise walking holidays in Britain and elsewhere as well. So it's been established over 100 years. They actually own a property on the neighbouring valley of Malham, and they own Newfield Hall, which is nearer Gargrave. So if you come out of Gargrave heading up towards Malham, I think it is marked on the with a plaque on the gate, and Newfield Hall stands up in some trees on the right-hand side, just beyond it. They also own Fawns Hall near Sedbergh, and Larpool Hall, which I guess is by the old viaduct at Whitby. The viaduct you can walk across. I think it was sold for £1 to the company that maintains footpaths. So that's the Holiday Fellowship plaque that you can see at the end of the Packhorse Bridge there. This is an earlier photograph I've taken. I've done a whole bit of video at the end. There's 7 minutes of a walk around Linton. So you can see here, this was taken in 1996, the last time I or the first time I gave this talk on this area as well. The sacks there are largely to protect the repair to the bridge, which was just been undertaken at that time. This was built around about the 14th century and then enlarged, widened in the 17th century. That's probably why you can see underneath here probably the enlargement of it around there as well. And so it was, I guess, if you were wanting to cross, is that you'd, with a horse and wagon, you would come across here, and probably in a motor car as well, before perhaps maybe that's 1892, so probably on the cusp of motor transport coming into this area. So you'd come across there, but in flood, you'd probably come across there as well. It's probably slightly easier for the horses crossing there and cooling them down as well. So that's the Packhorse Bridge. So you can say the road bridge is just about 100 yards further down there. You can see where the cars are at the end of that. And then moving up the village, and you'll see all this on the film, to the left-hand side, this is the start of what they call the Corpse Road, because obviously deaths taking place in Linton, they would have to be buried down at St Michael's and All Angels Church down by the river. And so that was called the Corpse Track that went down there across the fields. That had been what they'd have used the parishioners to walk down to the church as well. This is one of the older properties in Linton. It's got a date stone on there. I'm just having a quick look here of 1602, I think it is, on it. But above that, it's got the initials ITA, and they stand for John and Alice Topham. Like I said, there wasn't the use of a J, and I think it was about sometime in the late 1600s that J was introduced into the alphabet. And again, these properties here were barns to the farm around here, and now being converted into houses. At the end of this lane, which I presume might be this house, but it's probably a house that will eventually get a plaque on it, because there's quite a few sort of literary figures associated with Linton. And this was where Arthur Rastrick, or Raystrick, I don't know how people like to pronounce that, he wrote over 300 books on Yorkshire, and he lived here in 1940 until his death, aged 95 in 1991. He wasn't born in Linton, he was born at Saltaire in 1896. And some people might say he was a top man because he refused an OBE from Harold Wilson. And he wrote back saying, "Dear Harold, I am deeply disappointed in you." so, but he probably never expected to be honoured and didn't receive one as well. So I assume it's that property is because it says in a book that I read that it was the last property at the end of the track. It becomes a field beyond there, but you'll see that on the piece of film that I have on it. So I'm going to continue up the road here, and it really comes to a dead end up at the Grange Farm there. These properties, some of these date from 1851 around here, although Grange Farm at the end, that is dated 1730, and once the family home of the Sheepshanks family for over 200 years. Like I say, it's now bed and breakfast accommodation. You also see on the film there's a barn that stands in this field, I say that's 17th century, and is said to be on the site of the house where Richard Fountaine, or Fountaine, was born in 1639. That's one that's now just being converted into a property as well. So it's been laid empty for dozens of years around there. His mother, because Fountain's Hospital, we're going to see it on the other side of the Beck, and look at the association with the rector of Linton, that Matthew Hewitt, is that Matthew Hewitt's sister was the mother of Richard Fountaine, who here, because say he's Matthew Hewitt founded the Freshfield Free School. So that's what we see right up to the end of the left-hand side of the village, and like I say, it's where the road comes to an end up there. To go and see the other side of the village, you've got to cross this bridge here as well. This is a former clapper bridge which has been sort of greatly enlarged. That's the side of Fountain's Hospital over there, which we're going to have a quick look at. And this is the green, because this is where everything connects right across to there. And this clapper bridge, initially was a clapper bridge, stood further down where the road bridge of 1892 is today. So when they built that, they moved this old bridge higher up here and rebuilt it, so it doesn't quite look what it did used to look like. And it's, in fact, it's been tarmacked on the top as well, and obviously got railings so that people don't fall into the Linton Beck there as well. And so it leads across to the other side in front of Fountain's Hospital, which is this building. It's always really difficult to photograph because it faces north, and that's where the main part of the building is, where obviously the southern part of it is always in sunshine, so it's sort of built the wrong way round for photographers. And there's quite a sort of story to this building, because it's very ornate for this village, and people don't know whether it should have been built in this ornate style, whether the founder of it, Richard Fountaine, wanted it to look like this or not. But I think it's part of a tussle with the descendants of his, who some of them probably wanted it building and some of them probably didn't want it building because they lost out on his money. He died, he created his will, and in that will of 1721, he says he wanted to build really an almshouse, a hospital in Linton, because he was born on the other side of the Beck there. He died in 1722 in London, and he'd made his money down in London, initially there as a timber merchant. So these in the years sort of following the Great Fire of London, the Plague, and there's a lot of money to be made from rebuilding of houses, because they mostly rebuilt in stone, but this quite often used a huge number of wood for floorboards and for other things there. So he made his money from there, but obviously when the building boom started to die out, he moved over to being a merchant of a haberdashery merchant, and that's how he continued to make his money. So he made a lot of money, and it seems fairly typical of these people who are born in the Dales. We see the same thing happened down in Burnsall as well, with the building of a church by a former Lord Mayor of London, whose name I forget my thing, but off the top of my head. But he was born at Appletreewick further down, and so it's sort of, they all seem to remember where they were born or where their roots were, but went off to make their sort of fortune down in London. Now, no one really knows until fairly recently who actually designed this very ornate building. Some people thought it was John Vanbrugh because he was building Castle Howard round about the same time, although I wouldn't say he built it, he sort of did the sketches for it of what it was to look like, because he was a dramatist, a playwright and sort of other things. And so he was probably a gentleman architect, so probably had an eye for architecture. But the life of a person who did that was a chap called Nicholas Hawksmoor. I guess he did the more of the technical drawings of Castle Howard. And so I think it was either John Vanbrugh or Nicholas Hawksmoor, or it could be another chap, a gentleman sort of architect called William Wakefield. William Wakefield designed Duncan Park out at Helmsley and Gilling Castle as well. But it seems that he's been ruled out, and the recent research seems to think that it was William Etty, the son of John Etty of York. William Etty designed the Moot Hall in Leeds, which was sort of demolished, I think, in about 1830 or something like that. He was also involved in construction on Castle Howard. William Etty designed the mausoleum on the estate there as well, and the bridge at Stamford Bridge that goes over the River Derwent there. And he's been probably thought to have been the architect because he witnessed the land sale of this plot of land for the building of a hospital in 1723, and then construction started the following year. And so additional lands were bought as part of this. That's why I showed you Townhead Farm in Grassington, because the rentals of that still today go in to support the residents of the almshouse here. It's divided up into 6 small houses, and I must say they are small house. I've been in this one by the invitation when I was with a chap down there who knew him, and so you got really the door that goes in, the steps go straight upstairs, and there's one large bedroom, and this little tiny place has been converted into a bathroom. So it's got like a mini bath in it, come shower as well. And there is downstairs, this room here is a sort of parlour come a little scullery behind it, which has been converted into a kitchen. So they're very small, they're only designed for 1 people. So this huge building was designed really for housing 6 people, and I think that's all it can do today because of how small they are. You can see the one on the other side being a small, this seems to be rather a larger one, so I've not been in that one. The central thing here is open for you to go and have a look in, because downstairs it's got a chapel in there, and you can see it seems to be part of all these almshouses we looked at, and it will be something I'm coming on, I think in 2 or 3 weeks time. I'm going to look at other almshouses in Yorkshire as well to see the periods they were built in and how they were run, because like I say, like this one, they still are run today. So you can go in there and see that's a chapel inside there. It was refurbished in the last 20 years by a chap called Bob Middleton. I was down here with him. He's a man who I tried to film, who would tell me stories in the car and then refused to speak to camera about them, even though he wanted me to make a film of it. But we went down there with him, and it was him who introduced me to that, because he had actually done the repointing work and other construction works here, and that probably been in the 1990s in there. So that's the chapel you can see inside there. And you can see the documents on the side. That's a copy of the Richard Fountain's will on there. It has been destroyed, a lot of the pages in there, and they think that's because of the feud within the family of him, of not using the money to build the almshouse, because they think that the almshouse was half built, and then the feud continued and they wouldn't release the money for the rest of it, and eventually was, because the back side of the almshouse isn't as ornate as the front is, and there's something there's different architectural styles in it, and they think that construction probably ceased for probably a period of 4 or 5 years, and then a new sort of architect was drafted in, or whatever it is, to finish it off at a much cheaper cost than it would have originally been born. The other one there, that's the roll of honour to those men who served in Linton. So it's not all of them, but that just lists 17 men down there that died. And as I mentioned in that institute, the stone small stone cenotaph behind it lists 33 men from Linton area. So that's the hospital there. The other thing main down here, obviously named after Richard Fountaine again, is the inn down there, which is still open. That dates from the 17th century. Behind it, they converted other cottages into letting accommodation for it. Always seems to be very busy down here, especially this year as well. Even when I was there in late September, it seemed to be quite busy on the outside. And that's the view back, and it's got a flagpole there in the middle. But people always wonder about this sort of ornamental sort of globe design there. And this was due to Linton in Craven, as it says on the plaque, being adjudged first in the News Chronicle loveliest village in the North contest, 1949. Obviously, we're very proud of that, and so we put the globe on top of that post around there as well. The maypole there, that's quite a later edition of 1980, and you say it's run by Linton and Craven Parish Council. They bought the green in 1930, so that no development could take place on it. Indeed, they have a bylaw that says no sheep can be grazed on this either, which is quite unusual because some of those other places we've looked at that have these sort of small parishes make a rental income from leasing lands out for sheep to graze them to keep the grass down, but not here in Linton. And then that's sort of the village side of the main road that passes through it. And so this is the road that leads out towards Swindon Quarry. And this is Linton Old Hall, not to be confused with Linton Hall, which stands, or Linton House that stands behind it. This has been a manor house has stood here since the 13th century. The oldest part is to the left of the entrance, so it's this part around here, and built in 1644 or rebuilt in 1644. The Dutch gable effect added over here over the front door, that was added in the 18th century by the Atkinson family. Again, the Atkinsons were related to the Fountaine family. Lydia was a niece of Richard Fountaine, so it seems so that the Fountaine family probably owned the whole of the village at one time. And you can see on some of these up here, it's not immediately apparent, but these windows here and these windows here are all blocked in, and that's resulting due to the window tax that was imposed in the late 18th century. I think it was repealed about 1840 or something like that, because it was really withholding development and of the glass industry and the comfort of houses and things like that. But these large halls, so you can see how many windows are on it, would have been taxed enormously every year. And like I say, they would have been taxed also for chimneys as well. So that's led to a reduction in the number of chimneys, unless some of the wealthy families wanted lots of chimneys to prove that they could pay for that tax. But seemingly here, I think we can see 3 chimneys here, but those windows up there are still blocked in. Beyond going out of village, towards Swindon Quarry, and attached really almost to the hall, is this huge Lave Barn, as they call them. It was built, only with a very shallow first floor, as you can see above there, and the doorways in there interconnected with that. And this was initially used for the storage of, at one time, flax and wool, for use in the the local industries around here, and then were then converted completely into barns. And because it's notable for its many ventilation holes, probably not so much on this photograph, but on this part of the barn, because these are where normally cows were brought in over the winter months, and obviously the heat and the smell and things like that, that's what all these windows were, to allow the circulation of air within those barns. Then on the film, I'm coming back down the road, back down to the bridge area of 1892, and then just looking just down the side behind here, because immediately behind and unseen really is Linton House, This is the barn by the side of the road the track that leads down to Linton House, and there's a footpath the other side that goes down the side of Linton Beck, and that's where I'll be going down on the film. But this is what the Linton House barn looked like in 2016. It's now been converted into a house. Linton Barn, you can say, it goes down this private trackway into it, but in fact the footpath that comes down the side of it actually runs along the side of the wall to Linton House. That's what it looks like. It's nothing special, but it's a Victorian building here, and it's got a high, or it'd be probably around about 1800, I guess, but it's got a high wall around it. I just stuck the camera over it so you can see what it looks like. And this is where the Andertons lived, because they're the people that funded the Village Institute just on the road in. So that's what Linton House is. And then these are the stepping stones. This is where I end the film down here. And that house over the other side is called White Abbey and dates from around 1630. And the other author associated with Linton lived here. This was Halliwell Sutcliffe, and he sort of did romantic, I'm groaning there a bit, romantic portraits of the Dales. They're a bit sort of its time. He was born in Shipley in 1870, so it's rather fun of Rostrick. Being born at Saltaire, roughly within the same time span. He died here in 1932. On an additional photograph which showed towards the end, taken looking down towards White Abbey, there's the village pinfold stands in this area. And the further barn further over was converted into a house in 1982. So it's probably quite a place to, an expensive place to live is in Linton. So that's where I'm going to end today, really at the end of a Grassington talk around here. So I'm going to finally end with a 7-minute bit of film, which is a walk around Linton. So linking all those photographs together as one, so you can see what it's like. So because there's no talking on this one. I said that about the last one, but there was. I forgot about some old footage you put at the end. But this is I filmed right at the end of the day. It was a very busy day that I had, because I set off by filming at Freshfield with the drone, then going up to Kilnsea and all those other things, and Yarnborough as well. They were all done on the same day. So the light was going at the end of the day, but you know, it was a lovely day, but remained sunny the whole time.